Odawa. So that's here means crooked tree, right? That type of thing. So Harbor Springs, Petoskey area here. So I don't know, is this okay? Harbor Springs, Petoskey area here. So traditionally, we're introducing ourselves that way in our community. That allows us, when we talk to somebody else, to kind of get an idea of where you're from, right? So what community you're from, but also what role you play. So clans have a role within our community as to what they do. So a Crane clan are typically those that are speakers, or some would say leaders, but they represent they take information from their community and then they help share that back out. We have other clans like a bear clan, Mukwa. They're typically the medicine keepers, so they're more medicine oriented, or they can also be peacekeepers as well. So they're somewhat akin to maybe a police officer or that type of thing. We have a lot of other clans, a Sturgeon clan, which is Neme. They're older, so they're usually looked at. Sturgeon have been around for millennia, and so their role is more advice providing. They're looked at as wiser individuals, and play that role where you can go and get information from them. Turtle Clan is another kind of organizer, but more peacekeeper oriented, a little bit different than the Bear Clan, but very similar in that regard. So that's just an introduction that just we like to make sure or share with anybody here. But when we're meeting other individuals, that's how we introduce ourselves. I am the Natural Resource Department Director for Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians. So we'll talk a little bit about our Natural Resource Department, some of the things that we do. We'll talk a little bit about climate change, some of the activities that we're doing, some of the impacts that we see within our community. So research or some of the projects that we're working on, but also how it's impacting our community right now. So different things that we do traditionally. I might share a story in regards to maple syrup as well. For us, winter is when we tell our stories. So snow has to be on the ground traditionally. That has to do with the significance of winter is when your spirits and a lot of things need rest. So they're resting there. So it's more of a respect that we don't tell stories when those thunders, when those other spirits and those other beings are out during the summer. And it's a respect thing for them as well, but also it's to not bring their power or their energy to us unwantedly also. So that's why we tell stories in the winter when there's snow on the ground. Everything's resting in that regard. So our department has 5 different programs. We have an administration program. We have a conservation law enforcement program. We have a Great Lakes fisheries program. We have an inland fish and wildlife program. We also have a treaty rights enhancement program as well. The Treaty Rights Enhancement Program is one that we're re-teaching or reacquainting our tribal citizenry with treaty rights or those activities. Most of you are probably familiar, have heard of the boarding schools in that era there. That was one of the ways that things were taken from our community, language, those types of things. But also treaty rights. So our ability to exercise our treaty rights, our traditional ways of harvesting, we were forbidden from doing those until 1994 when our tribe was reaffirmed. So if you were spearing fish, if you were setting gill net, those were illegal activities under state law. So we've lost a couple generations where those families weren't able to exercise those treaty rights. So we're reacquainting them with that harvest and being able to go out there and do those. For us, our traditional harvest is set up a little bit differently than your state harvest or the way that state individuals look at it. Our management is a little bit different in that regard too. This is a relationship the tribal citizens have with the resource. So there's a respect there. We look at it, those resources and interacting with them that we people, Anishinaabe, are the most pitiful. And so we are reliant on those other species. It's much different from a biblical take a look at management, where man was put on earth to lay dominion or to conquer. Anishinaabe view it much differently in that regard, that without fish or without animals or without clean air or without land, we would cease to exist. But without us, the rest of the world would be fine. And so it's that relationship that we have in regards to those resources. In addition to that, when we're harvesting, we're looking at it from an efficiency standpoint then. So it's not a game. We're not managing our rules and regulations on thrill of the hunt or fair chase, those type of models, which are typically in your state management. They structure those such that you have this fair chase, if you will, or thrill to hunt. So we're looking to harvest species when it's efficient. So that means spearing fish when they're spawning. Some will say, well, that doesn't seem correct or that's not fair. We're not looking at it as a fairness. We're laying SEMA down. We're giving respect to those animals, and then we're harvesting them in an efficient manner such that we can move on with our life and we're paying respect to them. So that's a little bit different on how we do that. Of course, we also have a vested interest in the long-term care of those species. So we manage through science. We do cooperative agreements with the state of Michigan. So we're doing biological studies on those systems. We have a hatchery, small-scale hatchery, that we put some fish back into certain species, certain lakes. Our small-scale hatchery, though, is more of a educational and research facility. So it's not a production facility. It's not as large as, for example, those of you that are familiar with Odin, but it is a facility that we've really been able to utilize to help answer some questions for us. And we might get to that today in regards to Great Lakes whitefish as well. So the relationship that we have is different in that regard. One of the ways that we approach management too is a 7-generational approach. So it's something that some of you may have been familiar with a little bit. It can be a little bit abstract, or it's a little bit hard to explain. The way it is that we're looking to do things now that don't necessarily benefit this current generation. It may actually ask for some sacrifice of this current generation, such that future generations are benefiting. That 7 generations out. I will never know the people 7 generations from now that we're doing things for right now in that regard. And so it's not self-interest. So you're not doing it just for your kids that you know, or just for your grandkids that you'll know. You're doing it for future generations that you'll never interact with. And so it's a much longer time frame that you're looking at, affects how you do things now. But there's a willingness too within our communities to look at, and if there is sacrifice that needs to happen now, to do that, to be available to that. It's not just maximizing profit for this current generation or maximizing benefit for this current generation at the expense of future, saying, well, they'll just figure it out when they get there or that type of thing. It's a much different approach. One way to convey the 7-generational approach, though, is it is long-term, it's far out. I've been lucky to benefit from the 7-generational approach there, the Treaty of 1836. My generation right now, we're the 7th generation out from that. And that was the treaty that we secured our right to hunt and other privileges of occupancy here, which enabled us as a community through that negotiation to stay here, to be able to exercise treaty rights, to be able to always feed ourselves. That specific provision in that treaty has allowed us to do those things now. So 7 generations in the future. But one of the ways you can look at it, and it brings it a little bit more home in that regard, and can show that it's a long time frame, but it's not necessarily that if you start with yourself and you go to your kids, and then you go to your grandkids, and then you go to your great grandkids. Many of you may have, I hope to be able to know my great grandkids. And then if you start with yourself and you go to your parents, and to your grandparents, and to your great grandparents, some of us had an opportunity to know and meet our great grandparents. The distance between the great grandparents, your great grandparents, and your great grandchildren are 7 generations. Your great grandparents won't know your great grandchildren, but you may have. So you're in the middle. And so there's that connection, that connective tissue that goes through that. It seems long, and it certainly is long, but there is, that connection to it in that regard. I'm going to talk fast at times, but I'll slow down a little bit. If you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand anytime. I think we're going to use this as just a conversation. Yes. Sure.
Clan, then an actual family clan, or can you choose what clan you're going to be in?
Okay.
Because, let's say you have affinity for speaking for leadership. And but you're in family that doesn't have some, how does that work?
Yeah, so clans are either patrilineal or matrilineal. So you are born into those. Yep. So it depends. Some communities are run through the father's side, some communities run through the mother's side. So there can be, though, if you don't know your clan, a lot of those things were lost as well. So the boarding school era is one of those as well. A lot of that oral history and that tradition were lost. So there's a way that you can go and talk to individuals within our community, certain individuals, and they'll be able to go out and do a fast or think hard and go through a process and be able to determine what clan you are. The clan system is informal to a certain degree, right? So it's not part of our job descriptions that you apply for a position and, well, if you're Bear Clan, you can only work in the hospital or the clinic, and if you're this, but it just gives a general role, and those families typically, those individuals typically do that. That's also large, so we're part of the three fires, so Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi. If you take all three of those together, we all speak the same language. They're three separate tribes, but we all speak the same language, all share the same cultural and background and those types of things. So you put all this together, including First Nations in Canada, it's about 350,000 people. If you look at Navajo Nation, they're the largest, and then Cherokee, and then it would be us, Anishinaabe, after that. Some communities, just through a course of history and time, have more of one clan than the other. So you put all these together, and then there's different clans from throughout. So we have a lot of bird clans, so Eagle Clan, a G-Jack, so Crane Clan. We don't have a lot of fish clans, so there's other communities that do have those. So it's this broader context too when you come together. It's not just necessarily one community is going to have all of those. It's the other communities have those, and you come together and they draw on those. Okay, good question. Okay, so some of the things that we're seeing here is definitely there is a climate, change, or there's a process there that we're certainly seeing. We're doing quite a bit of research underneath the Biden administration. We were able to get some dollars to address some of those. So we've implemented things that are, on a more small scale. We're looking to implement things on a larger scale as well. But renewable energy, we have some solar arrays at a couple of our facilities. So our hatchery is a big consumer of power. So primarily from pumping and generating water. So we've implemented a recirculating system in there. So that allows us to recirculate up to 90% of the water. So that has really diminished the amount of power we needed. We've also put in there some solar panels as well. Our natural resource department has solar panels as well. But those are just small things, right? So those are just kind of one thing that you can do. Some of the work that we're really looking at right now is, are there larger, bigger things that we can look at that will help maybe collectively? So we have, renewable energy, those solar panels, but we also have electric vehicles. We're supporting those. We have 2 electric vehicles, but those again are smaller type things. One of the things that we're really starting to pay more attention to and looking to do some more research into is your data centers. So data centers are, popping up all over. Everybody uses the internet, and those have a lot to do with it. AI is definitely generating that. So we are pragmatic to a certain degree. We know that there will be these data centers that'll be coming in certain areas, but how do you reduce that carbon footprint? How do you reduce, the amount of energy that's needed for those? How do you reuse some of those? So we're looking to see about doing some pilot projects. If you situate a data center in a place that has, for example, a wastewater treatment plant, then you can use that water that's already being pumped and ran through your wastewater treatment plant before it's discharged. You can use that for cooling. So that's one way to reduce the amount of water that's being drawn. If you have a data center that's harvesting heat to cool it, then if you have a community next door, a housing community, a development, then you can harvest that heat and run it through that as well. There's very similar processes in Europe that they have with their power plants, where they're heating the sidewalks in their communities, or heating their communities from this waste heat from their power facilities. So there's some similar ideas in that regard too. So we're looking at, are there ways to situate those smarter and better to do that? And if we can get more industry to adopt that, if we can get Microsofts or otherwise to take an interest in that, then that could really significantly reduce some of that power or that energy.
The reason why it's difficult to do that is because they're popping up everywhere, and it seems to be something that they need to do right now and not really think about it thoughtfully and come up with those kinds of accommodations like you're talking about. They're just looking to plump it anywhere they can get one, regardless of what you've been talking about, how they can share the water, produce the heat that others can use.
Yeah, so I think there's a certain amount of, I think that's like self-created urgency that they create the urgency that this has to happen right now. I think there's, a lack, if there was some public sentiment to say, hey, all right, these are going to happen, but make them this way, do it this way. Look at these other models, harvest that heat, reduce your water intake by using existing water facilities or those types of things, then I think they would. And we're just not, there's not enough pressure, in my opinion, right now on them to do that.
And it seems to be happening very quickly.
It's happening quickly. Again, I think that's just self-created. And some of it is also that the technology is moving forward faster, that they're reducing some of that energy demand by just the technologies increasing quickly too. So there's some reason to slow down a little bit and allow technology to pick up a little bit to be more efficient, but then also incorporate these other ideas. Some of the things that we certainly are seeing in terms of climate change and the issues that we're running into is the shortening of the seasons. 2 years ago, we basically didn't have a winter, right? We were playing pickleball on Christmas, which was unheard of here. As a result of that, though, we didn't tap any trees that year. So maple syrup and maple sugar are an important part of our community culturally. It's always been important. Historically, we would move from these areas up here down to Muskegon area, those types of things. Those would be your winter camps. Those are more dispersed, so you're kind of in single family or a group of families. And then you would come back. So maple syrup or maple sugaring was when you came back together after you've been separated for most of the winter. So it was a real social aspect to it. Also, it was very calorically important. So after the winter, it was pretty hard to be able to sustain yourself to the way you can in the summer. And so when you came back to sugar camp, communities there produced a lot of sugar, and some individuals would just eat sugar for almost 2 weeks, right? So you build that up. The children really like that and appreciate it. As really is one of the only seasoning or sweet things that we have in our communities. So there's a real cultural connection to that. Later, it became more economically important in terms of producing sugar as a commodity and selling it. It also has some medicinal purposes. So there are certain ceremonies that we currently have still that maple sap, that first sap out of the tree, is necessary for that. We have to have that for those ceremonies. So it has a ceremonial connection too. So when we lost that year, there was a real debate really within our community on whether to tap trees or not. Some individuals in other communities did. Our community decided that we wouldn't. And a part of that was, I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that there is a cultural feeling, and this touches on traditional ecological knowledge too, that it's the trees need a break, that they need that rest. And culturally, we look at winter as that's a time when all the animals need a rest and a break. And that year, they didn't have that. And so culturally and from a scientific standpoint, we felt it was just going to be too harmful to tap those trees, to place that on them. Now, we tap trees every year. We have a place. My mom lives off corner M119 in Middle Road. If you guys are ever driving to Pond Hill Farm, you look in that first valley there. That's where our sugar sap shanty is. So we'll be out in a couple weeks tapping trees there and run it for usually, hopefully 3 weeks though. If you see smoke coming out the top, then that means somebody's in there and we're boiling sap down. So that's something that our family has done. And we've tapped trees, multiple trees, the same tree, every year in different locations, and it doesn't harm the tree. It heals back over, you move the tap around, and these trees are able to be tapped, for generations really. But that year, it was something that we felt wasn't going to benefit or wasn't going to be something that we wanted to do. A lot of other communities did, but from us, again, culturally, that's something that we chose not to do. That bleeds into what we call traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge. That is our cultural or just way of working with the environment. It can be from language, it can be from an oral tradition or a story, influences how we do things, but it's science as well. It's just something that modern day science hasn't caught up to. There used to be a lot of things that people didn't understand and called magic before they understood the science on it. Gunpowder, certain things that people didn't understand, just felt it was magic in that regard. I'll equate one little story in regards to language that highlights the use of just traditional ecological knowledge here as well, is that, well, things that are small, bugs, microbes, those types of things, we call Manitou aunts. So Manitou is a spirit. Aunts, if you ever see aunts on the back of a Anishinaabe word, that means small. Miigwants Miigwan is feather. You put the aunts on it, little feather. Wagashants, everybody know where Wagashants Point is. That's up by Wilderness State Park. Wagoosh is fox. Aunts is small. Wagashants is small fox, little fox. So the name for those bugs, those microbes, is Manitou ants. So we knew that there was such a significance to those microbes, to those little things, that we gave it a spirit name, that it was a small spirit. Well, how does that relate to science? How does that relate to things moving forward? If you know about clear cuts, if you know about intense, high intensity burns, that denudes the soil. It kills everything in the soil. And so if you go back out and you try to replant a forest with the same trees, and you go out there like a farm and put those in there, those trees don't grow to the degree that they did in the past. They fail most often because that microbial community, that fungi, that community down there has been disrupted by that high intensity burn, or by being UV rays from being exposed after a clear cut. And so science knows that now. And so there's a way that you can work through that. But traditional ecological knowledge, Anishinaabe knew that from that standpoint, that significance on those. As it is right now, it's getting close to being maple syrup time for us. And so again, that was a significant impact for our community. A lot of individuals didn't. We did tap last year, and then there was an ice storm right in the middle of that as well. Many of our trees did make it though. They're pretty resilient. There was a big concern, that individuals thought, and a lot of logging companies pushed. Your red pine is a little bit different, but your other trees, these are adaptive trees. They've went through these type of systems before. Our trees made it through fine. They're going to be okay this year as well. We're going to be able to tap those. There's some tops broken off, but they're still, for the most part, pretty good. So I'll relate one story here in regards to maple syrup. That kind of shows a little bit of that connection there, but it really shows some of the more of that significance of maple syrup in regards to maple sugar in our community. So some of you may be familiar or not, but within Anishinaabe culture, Nanabuju is a demigod, if you will. Plays a significant role in our community, can grow big, be small, trickster sometimes, help name all the things here. So it was one of the first beings here, and then Anishinaabe came along as well. So Nanabuju was out looking for Anishinaabe. So he was looking for him. For the community, Anishinaabe is just a general term for all of us Odawa individuals. It can be interpreted to mean, first people or original people, that type of thing, the good people. So Nanabuju was looking for Anishinaabe, came over to the fields where they should be, didn't see any Anishinaabe in the fields. He went over to the fishing grounds to see if they were perhaps out on the lake and fishing. Didn't see any Anishinaabe. Went back to the village to see, well, maybe they were just resting, seeing if they were napping in that regard. Didn't find Anishinaabe. So he went out to the maple grove, and he came over the hill, and laying on their backs were all the people from the community, all the Anishinaabe from the community. And they had snapped the branch off of the maple trees, and maple syrup was coming directly out into everybody's back, laying on their backs, drinking this maple syrup. And so the Nanabuju backed off and watched for a little while and said, well, they're neglecting the things that they need to. They're neglecting their family. They're neglecting work that needs to be done for when winter comes here. And they're just getting fat. They're just being lazy out there. So that night, Nanabuju grew himself up to a giant person, made a giant Wigwas makuk, so a birch bark basket or bucket, if you will, went out into the lake and scooped up water from that. Came back to the maple grove and broke all the tops of the trees off, and then he poured all that water, nibish, into all of those trees. The next morning, when all the Anishinaabe went back out, it was diluted. It wasn't that pure sweet water anymore. In addition to that, it used to flow year round. Well, Nana Bourgeois made it such that no, it was only going to flow once per year now. And so Anishinaabe would have to work in order to get that. They have to collect maple sap and have to boil it into maple water or into maple syrup. And it would take time, and it would not be year round, but be once per year. And so that's shows some of the significance to it. That's something that our family does too. We take it, in earnest. We put buckets and spiles on the trees, and so we're tapping, we're collecting, we're bringing it over, we're boiling it. We're not running the plastic system or the tubing system. And that's, from this cultural standpoint, this tradition here, that it pays reverence to that it was meant to be hard. It's meant to be work. It's meant to be appreciated. It's meant to go through that process such that you value it, and you don't take things for granted or neglect your responsibilities or other duties as well. So that's just one story. That's just a story our community has. There's other tribal stories in regards to the maple sap and maple syrup and maple sugar and those types of things. Neither is right or wrong. It's just one of the ones that we have in our community. There's similarities. That's one from our community specifically. So we are seeing these impacts from climate change. One of the other ones that we're definitely concerned about is lack of ice. This year has been a good year. This has been a winter, right? So, but in many years past, we haven't had that. So your lack of ice can do a couple of things. Great Lakes ice specifically, we're talking about. Can affect your lake levels. So the lack of ice then allows a lot more evaporation in the winter, and that decreases your lake levels. So those can cause some issues. Also, the lack of ice affects some of our species in the Great Lakes that are overwinter spawners. So Great Lakes whitefish and Great Lakes lake trout, they are fall spawners, and they spawn on near shore areas, in the reefs specifically. That lack of ice does a couple things. One is that it allows UV light to penetrate, which then bothers and or harms and or kills some of the eggs there. That's compounded by the fact that our lake is a lot clearer than it used to be as well. So not only is there a climate change issue that's affecting these fall spawners, specifically Great Lakes whitefish, but then there's also an invasive species that's affecting them. Great Lakes whitefish are in about a 90% decline from the 2000s. So that's significant. If you place it in that same significance in regards to lake trout, we had experienced about a 90% decline in the late 50s, which was attributed to sea lamprey. And so then there was a real push to address that issue there. The Great Lakes Fisheries Commission was created by national between the United States and Canada. They were tasked with figuring out a way to combat lamprey, and they created eventually quagga or lampricide rather, and were able to address those. So Great Lakes whitefish is in the same position right now. We're very concerned about Great Lakes whitefish. We worked with Representative Dingell and Representative Wahlberg. We've had Representative Bergman now has signed on for a bill to amend the Great Lakes Fish Commission or Great Lakes Fisheries Act of 1956. It's called the Save Great Lakes Fish, to add invasive mussels to their responsibility. So not just focusing on lamprey, but also focusing on invasive mussels. Quagga mussels are one of those. And then to put some funding towards it, about 500 million over the course of 10 years. So about 50 million, per year to address this issue. In our opinion, we have about 5 years if we aren't able to do anything before we can see Great Lakes whitefish be extirpated from the upper lakes. So Lake Huron, Lake Michigan. So it's pretty drastic. They're culturally important to the tribe. There's a story also in regards to Great Lakes whitefish, how Great Lakes whitefish helped Anishinaabe. So again, there is this thinking or belief that Anishinaabe are kind of the most pitiful, and so there was a time where people, Anishinaabe, were not doing well, and Anabozhu was concerned about Anishinaabe. So he convened a gathering of animals and went around and asked, who's going to help Anishinaabe? Who's going to have pity on Anishinaabe? Who's going to provide for them? And so they went around to the deer and to the elk and to the sturgeon. And when they got around to Great Lakes whitefish, Great Lake whitefish, Adikamek raised their hand and said that they would provide for Anishinaabe. And that's been part of our culture here is Great Lakes fish, not just from an economic standpoint, not just from a commercial standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint as well. Yes.
The whitefish in Lake Superior,
Yes.
and is the population there a little more stable, or is it in peril?
So Lake Superior is a little bit different. It's naturally clear already, so that it's less productive than these lower lakes already. So there are Great Lakes whitefish up there, but they're not to the numbers that they were historically down here. In addition to that, the quagga mussels are beginning to move that way. There's some theory that Lake Superior is not productive enough and doesn't have enough calcium for the quagga mussels to actually make their shells. But that we're starting to see that's changing. Also, is a deeper, colder, but quagga mussels can occupy much, much greater depths. In Lake Michigan, they occupy 90% of the bottom of Lake Michigan, and they have, in some areas, can be 3 feet thick in terms of the quagga mussels there. So they're just blanketing, the bottom lake there. We did see now that there are a couple whitefish production or great areas that they show up. Apostle Islands, a couple of these shallow areas, Lake Superior or Superior near Duluth. Now we're finding quagga mussels in those areas. So these shallower, more productive areas that are beneficial to Great Lakes whitefish, we're starting to see some of that. So the problem is not as severe in Lake Superior, but we don't think that they're going to be immune from it. Yep. So yeah, so climate change and that issue is really affecting them. In terms of the quagga mussels, they can pull upwards of 55 gallons per quagga mussel per day. So they're flipping the lake over and over and over. Many people that come up here and look at our lakes right now, I think that they're beautiful, right? Come out to the bay there and it looks like the Caribbean, right? It's beautiful in that regard. You can take a glass, put it in the lake and hold it up and it looks like a distilled glass of water. There's not a single thing floating around in it. That's not healthy. That's not what our systems should be. That's not what they should look like. But quagga mussels are, offshore. One of the other issues that we've seen with that is that they've replaced zebra mussels. So zebra mussels were the ones that were more shallow. So if you go to the beach, you would step on them, they would kind of be in the water, those types of things. Quagga mussels are a little bit deeper, so they're not occupying that near shore area. You'll see shells wash up and kind of crushed on the shore, but they're not there in that degree. So people think, well, that means that the problems went away. It's not. It's exacerbated. It's much, much worse. But they're deeper, right? There's not this interaction. Great Lakes whitefish are being impacted. We know Great Lakes whitefish are being impacted because of the work that we do in terms of monitoring and managing Great Lakes whitefish because there's a commercial fishery associated with it. But there are a number of species that aren't. Perch, Cisco, these other species as well. So we know that those are being impacted as well. Great Lakes whitefish is more or less the canary in the coal mine. We see that there's an issue here. It's affecting this cascade. So we're working to trying to message that, get that information out there too. One of the ways though that people are interacting with the lakeshore that is a direct result of quagga mussels is that algae that washes up. So people generally think of algae in terms of a eutrophic system, a system that has lots of nutrients. Some may think of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi puts in a lot of nutrients, and there's huge algal blooms out there. That's the opposite for us. So the reason why we have a lot of this algae that's washing up on the shore is because the water is so clear. Now sunlight is penetrating upwards of 60 feet in depth. And so any exposed rocks, those types of things now are being colonized by algae. again, because those nutrients have been taken out of the water, but now they're on the bottom. So the quagga mussels, when they decay, when they die, that's where the nutrients are on the bottom there. And so now you're seeing these algae occupy these vast areas of our bottom. And now when there's a storm event, now when there's a lot of wave action, that gets washed up and ends up being on shore. That's not because of a eutrophic system. That's not because there's too many nutrients. It's because it's a dynamic with quagga mussels. And so we're trying to help people understand that as well as we get support or try to get support for this bill. Petoskey State Park is a great place there. I think many of us probably have swam there. It's at the end of the bay, so it collects a lot of things there. So when we go and swim, I spend about an hour and a half, combing or brushing all the algae out of my daughter's hair after she comes out of there. And so it's something that, really affects all of us in that ground. As the lake levels go down, you get more algae that wash up, and then you have these stagnant areas as well. That is a direct result of these quagga mussels. Climate change, though, is also exacerbating that for Great Lakes whitefish. So not only is it the lack of ice that's allowing, again, this light to penetrate now that the water is much more clear as well. So that's kind of a double whammy for it. But also they're getting battered. So we have a lot more higher intense storm events without a lot of ice or without any ice. And so those eggs now are getting battered for, 6 months of the year, when before they were being, immune to that. They were being protected in that regard. So that's another issue there that we're seeing in regards to Great Lakes whitefish, directly related to climate change in that regard. We've seen some impacts to other species on their habitat. We're doing some work in regards to marten reintroduction as well. So marten are a conifer-based little small animal. They typically eat redback voles. They're somewhat specific to those, but they like conifer areas, but they also need snow. So they need snow depth. They're subterranean. So they will operate under the snow, and that's where they're predating on mice or these voles, is in that snow. So they'll dig like a little cave system, and that's how they operate. But with the lack of snow, then that disrupts that, makes them more susceptible to other predators as well. So typically owls will predate on them. So that again affects them as well. So this lack of snow is having an impact in that regard as well. We're also seeing from what we believe climate change is an impact, again, related to snowpack and cold, are ticks. So I've been in my position since 2002. We never thought anything about having to worry about ticks going out into the woods out here. We didn't roll up our pants. We didn't tie them off. If you went to the UP, then there were some issues. Yeah, certainly you had to be aware of ticks out there. But our guys now all do that. They're wearing long sleeves in the summertime. They're taping or they're cinching their pants. They're doing tick checks when they get out of the woods. So we're seeing this impact. Why is that? Well, snow and cold is what keeps those ticks generally at bay. But so now we're not seeing that. So that opens up the number that survive through the winter. That increases the number that we have out there. And so not only is it a people issue, but we're starting to see them affect wildlife as well. In the Upper Peninsula, certainly different story than us down here, but it's being exacerbated up there. The moose population is on the decline up there. UP was really on the border between moose habitat and whitetail habitat. So it's at the far northern extreme for whitetails, at the far southern extreme. But climate change has really impacted moose in a couple of ways. One is ticks. So there's some animals now that they have upwards of 100,000 ticks on them. So they're being bled more or less out of that. They don't really have a good way to get those off. The other issue that we see with those is that moose are large animals, so they need thermal refuges in the summer. They can tolerate all kinds of cold. They're designed for that. But when it's too warm in the summer, then they need cool places to go, cool bodies of water, cool forests to do that. Otherwise, they just can't thermal regulate, and that they overheat in that regard. So we're seeing that, again, these climate change problems affect those. There's a moose study right now that the Sault Ste. Marie tribe up there in Sault Ste. Marie and state of Michigan are doing to try to evaluate moose and the numbers of moose, but we're really seeing that those numbers decline. So some of the things that we're looking at too in that regard is, as we move forward, traditionally for us, We have our treaty rights, but those aren't to a specific species. Those are enabling us to be able to harvest a species, to be able to provide. And so as things change, our community is looking at, well, we aren't moving, we're not leaving this area. So how do we look at things address, moving in the future? One of the things that we're looking at then is elk reintroduction. So there is an elk population over in Gaylord, but that population didn't start from a scientific standpoint. If you had all the biologists, which we did, get together and look at the Lower Peninsula, for example, and say, all right, where's the best place to put elk? That would not have been it. Now, those elk over there were brought in by private individuals in 1908. There were 7 that were brought in, and then they were just kind of let out in the landscape, and the state didn't manage them or do anything with them until the late 70s, early 80s, and then began to really start thinking about managing them. So they just happened to appear there. So we did study with the state of Michigan and a couple other tribes, and then looked at the state, did an evaluation down by here on Manistee. We think there are 2 places there near Manistee that would be suitable for it. Large national forests, a lot of public ownership, not very much ag. There's an effort now by the state or the national forest system to start reincorporating prescribed burn, so you can keep these oak savannas open there, and change some of the management from just timber harvest, but to manage for these other species as well and these other types. So we think that's something that's going to be that we're pushing for. We're working to try to encourage the state of Michigan to join us in reintroducing elk to that area. If they don't, I think the tribes will. I think we'll move forward in that regard with the national forest. But that's one of the ways that we're looking at, trying to address climate change too, is all right, what things are going to be more suitable as things change. We've also done some assisted migration for trees. So we've taken some more southernly adapted trees and put them on a couple of our tribal properties, white oak, sassafras, these species that are more likely to be a little bit southern Michigan, and then move those up here, such that climate change, could be accelerating to the degree that those trees won't be able to make it here, and you'll just end up with a lot of open areas with dead trees or not as many trees. So we're looking at mass producing trees, trees that provide nuts for wildlife or have a cultural value. Sassafras has a cultural and medicinal value as well, to try to move some of those up. But we're trying to look forward to on what things can we help do such that when things do change, that we can move in that regard. The last thing I'll say too about a whitefish, that's hampering them too, is that they are a cool water species. And so as the lakes heat up, we're concerned about that reaching the higher threshold tolerance for Great Lakes whitefish. And that's believed widely to be a problem. However, we have a small scale hatchery, and we've pioneered, looking at how to raise Great Lakes whitefish. Nobody else was really looking at doing that. The state of Michigan, not the feds. It's the tribes that are really pioneering this work. And so one of the things that we were able to discover was Sault Ste. Marie tribe, we're the only 2 tribes really working on it, was that Great Lakes whitefish has a much higher tolerance for heat than anybody had thought. So nobody has been testing that before. This happened in regards to how we're rearing them. There's 2 ways that you can rear fish. So in a hatchery setting, raceways. So if you've been to like Odin Fish Hatchery, they're doing rainbow trout, not a native species, introduced species, but it's been naturalized. And they're in raceways. But then you can also do ponds. And so what we discovered is that Great Lakes whitefish can and do fairly well in ponds. And those ponds, though, can be fairly shallow and can heat up during the summer to around 70 degrees, which was thought to be toxic, that there would be no way that a Great Lakes whitefish could survive in that. And we've seen that they've actually been able to persevere. Now, that's for rearing. We don't want Lake Michigan to be, top to bottom heating up 70 degrees, but near shore, certainly in the summertime, everybody appreciates it when it gets above, 60, but so there's that we've been able to do. And so there's some hope that we have, in terms of, species and adaptation, in terms of climate change and trying to move the ball forward in that regard. So I'll pause there, see if anybody has any more questions. I think we're, sure.
So, I just saw Lake Erie's got 95% ice cover on it right now, but do whitefish,
Are there whitefish in Lake Erie?
Yes, so
Maybe it's a good year.
so Lake Erie is fairly shallow, so it's very productive. But being shallow as well is able to flush a lot of those potential contaminants out of there when they have them. So, Lake Erie, caught on fire, right? Like back in the day there. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have some legacy contaminant issues still, which affects the fishery, which affects, how much people are able to catch and eat from there. They have some advisories, those types of things. But they do have Great Lakes whitefish down there. Yes, absolutely. They also have drum. So they're a rough fish per se, but they have the largest otoliths out of any fish. So an otolith is a fish bone that's how they hear. It's like an ear bone. And one of the ways that you can age fish is through that otolith. Most of your otoliths are tiny in this regard. The drum, their otoliths are about the size of a 50-cent piece. I'm not from the area, but I know that the other people are, that you can go down there and they call them fish stones. They'll wash up on the beach because there's that many of them. People use them for jewelry or different type of things. Traditionally, Anishinaabe communities would use those to make dice games. So there's a long-standing gambling tradition within our communities, and that's one of the ways that we did it was, made dice out of the otolith of a drum. So we don't have too many around here. I think it's, again, that system is very productive. Yes.
Well,
Yep.
then
It's the common name of the fish. Yes. It's kind of like a sheephead fish. It's a rough fish, so meaning kind of like a carp and or a sucker is in that category. Yes. Uh, yes.
I mean, or I'm out of the Erie, but I'm from Ohio, so I know the years when you would never consider consuming anything that came out of Lake Erie.
Yeah, Lake Erie's got a pretty decent commercial fishery now. So the Clean Water Act has been fantastic in that regard. We've seen all of our lakes clean, and to that degree, one of the biggest beneficiaries that are kind of related, and I think really shows how these environmental laws have benefits that go beyond, is bald eagles. So they have benefited from the Clean Water Act, from banning of DDT. DDT was affecting eagles' shells. So when they incubated the shells or the chicks, their eggs, they were crushing them. So when we started monitoring eagles here on and around our reservation in Sheboygan County, in 2005, we were monitoring about 5 nests. We monitor upwards of 33 nests now. They came off the endangered species list in 2006. And so you see lots of eagles around now. That's a direct result of the Clean Water Act. And it just took 40 years for those legacy contaminants to work their way out of the system. So you had to have that patience too. Not only were they banned, and then the next year you've seen benefits, it takes a long time. Lake Erie, I think, cleaned up fairly quickly again because it's shallower and it can just wash that stuff out more. But they got a good perch fishery, they got a good walleye fishery, and there are Great Lakes whitefish there. So the thing about Great Lakes whitefish too is there are populations. So there are distinct populations. The idea that, well, we can just wait and have Great Lakes whitefish in Michigan or Lake Huron be extirpated, and then we'll just draw fish stocks from Lake Superior or Lake Erie or somewhere else, doesn't mean that they're going to be well suited for here. We had those issues with lake trout. Lake trout were extirpated in Lake Michigan, so they came from Lake Champlain in New York, or yeah, I think in New York. And so those aren't perfectly adapted here. So there's some been modifications and trying to figure that out. In the Upper Peninsula, Lake Superior, there are fats now, which are a hybrid lake trout, which is not desirable from a commercial and or subsistence fishery. And so they occupy a certain amount of that. There's a hybrid between a brook trout and a lake trout. So there's some things that we're trying to head off in terms of, and there's real benefit to preserve, your current fish populations here. Great Lakes whitefish is one of those.
just read recently that, the, current federal administration has decided to withdraw from the founding principles that pollution, air pollution, and water pollution is unhealthy for humans. And withdrawing that, there's no way to enforce the polluter to stop. Is the tribe getting their terms out there and suing on that, or is this something we're just going to wait for?
Yeah, the current
To do something, or what?
the current administration has been challenging, certainly, especially from the EPA environmental standpoint. You know, they're telling us, we meet with them quite regularly. You know, they're telling us that they're going to enforce the law. So whatever is in the law, they're enforcing the law. This anti-degradation change, though, they said or felt that it was beyond the scope of the Clean Water Act. So they're still committed to enforcing the Clean Water Act. They're still enforcing the Clean Air Act, rather, for the emissions, the anti-degradation in California. So they're still committed to those, but where they see or interpret that they feel that there's something that's been taken beyond that, then they're not willing to do that. They're picking and choosing, in our opinion, and that is concerning. So I think we, you know, the tribe, certainly we're trying to hold EPA accountable for at least what's on the books now in terms of enforcing Clean Water Act, in terms of enforcing Clean Air Act. But that means that they got to have people, right? So they got rid of a lot of people too. So within their federal system, their staff. So you need people that are going to enforce the permits. You got to have investigators. You got to have those who are really trying to push them in that regard too. There are a couple lawsuits that tribes have in regard to some environmental issues. There was a law or a order, presidential order underneath the Biden administration, in a rule that was put in place called the Treaty Reserved Rights Rule. So that would compel the states, when they go through their triennial review on water quality standards, they're updated or they're reviewed every 3 years, that state, if there were tribes in that state that had treaty rights, then that state would have to work with those tribes to make sure that those rules and regulations, those water quality standards, were protective of subsistence harvest, were protective of commercial harvest. The Trump administration several states sued the Biden administration on that, and the Trump administration has just declined to enforce or to be part of defending that. So it's debatable to whether that rule exists anymore, or will be repealed. It probably will be repealed. So the tribes are suing in that regard. So there's a lawsuit. There's an active lawsuit in that regard. So we are seeing, yeah, some things certainly being pulled back. But they're telling us that they're going to enforce the law. So if it's in the law, they're going to enforce it. So we have to hold them accountable to that.
You see the state stepping up.
So our state is, you know, I think has in certain circumstances so in this specific regard, in terms of the Treaty Reserved Rights Rule, state of Michigan is going through a triennial review right now. And so regardless of whether that federal rule compelling the state to work with the tribes is in place or not, the state of Michigan is committed to that. And so we're meeting with them, we're talking with them, which is great. But that's really then just this administration, right? So if there comes a new administration, state administration, and there's nothing compelling them to do that, then they may choose not to. And so that's, you know, one of the benefits that we've seen, that we're hoping to have that stay in place.
Nice.
Absolutely, yeah. Generally speaking, the state has stepped up in a certain regard, you know, this current administration, certainly.
I was wondering, how big is a marten that you were talking about?
Like this big.
And they're around here?
So Chandler Hill area, so kind of, you know, southeast, southwest, southeast of us. Little bit more towards 75. So there's a pocket there. We are starting to see some migrate down. So that's a benefit too of ice coverage, especially when the straits are covered, is that you start to see some come down. You know, we haven't had any documented wolves since 2016, but we documented a wolf, you know, on northern part of Emmett County, in there. And then also there's the potential for some marten and fisher. We do have a fisher that we had on a res too, which is a little bit bigger. That's kind of like more of a fox type size. They're cute though. They're kind of a orange color and like a white throat patch. And their white throat patches are unique. So that's one way that we can identify them. So we have camera traps out and they come through and we take pictures of them and we can kind of utilize, be able to identify individuals from that.
Just gonna add, my mother, who would be 98 now, back in the day, when mink collars were in style, they also had, stone markings, where two of the skins would be like, you'd get one, and then they made the mouth clip, and then you would clip it around as a fashion accent, and my mother was so proud of her stone markings. Oh, and I mean, and that was the day.
Sure.
That was the day.
Well, you know, a fur harvest can be somewhat controversial. One of the issues that we're seeing here is they're called mesopredators. So like your coons, your possums, that there's a lot of them. There's not a lot of predators, so we don't have any wolves down here. Coyotes are not really eating those. And so with the lack of like fur harvest, you're seeing much higher populations of those. And we're seeing impacts now to other species, turtles specifically. We do a lot of work with wood turtles. Raccoons will just dig up all those eggs. So now we're trying to identify where these turtles are so that we can put some enclosures up. But that's a lot of manpower and a lot of work there. So, you know, trying to achieve this balance when you don't have top predators and you have a lot of these mesopredators, you know, can be difficult. But we're seeing a lot of impacts from that. In addition to deer, there's way too many deer.
Question. Well, thank you for coming and sharing with us today, because the work you're doing is very important, and the time you spend doing things like this pulls you away from work. But on the flip side, education is the only way to get people to maybe change their mindset, think differently. As a person who is getting older at my age, I know that a lot of things that but I know that a lot of things that I may put my energies into, I won't see the result of that in my lifetime. I know that my children and my grandchildren will probably, may not, I would hope so, but I appreciate sharing that 7 generations, which I've heard before, but I think we need to be reminded of that at time. But the challenge right now is the people who are here listening to you. We're already totally supporters. We're in the camp. I doubt you have anyone here today that isn't saying, yes, this is important for them. We all agree it's important. We like what you're doing. I think the challenge is, how do we reach the element of people who are either ignorant about it or have a different mindset? Do you have suggestions for us?
I wish I did. You know, we're trying to branch out certainly to talk to different groups. So there's groups that we have a lot of similarities with, but then also have a lot of different divergent ideas. So we haven't spent in the past a lot of time talking to hunt clubs or those type of individuals. So we are now, and so there's some like interest in terms of expanding elk or some other opportunities that gives us an opportunity to talk about other issues too. We just met with the Commercial Fishermen's Association of Michigan and Wisconsin. Again, an organization that is usually tribal friendly. There's been a lot of conflict over the years. But so we talked and spent a lot of time talking about Great Lakes Whitefish and Save the Great Lakes Whitefish Act. And they're seeing it. They understand what these issues are in terms of the numbers being down. And then we talk about, you know, how climate change is impacting that and, you know, how these quagga mussels are impacting it. So that I think that that's starting to broaden them to maybe move beyond and have these larger conversations that they, you know, typically don't. So, but those are baby steps. We're just trying in that regard. In there, yes, we're all in it together, right?
Just I mean, you have so many different initiatives that, how do you prioritize? Like, what's the decision-making process of like seasonal of the?
Yeah, so we do have a variety of programs. So I'm the director. We do have a strategic plan, right? So it's kind of is keeping, you know, within that. You know, for us, some of you that maybe that have been in you know, nonprofit world, otherwise we do get a lot of grants. And there can be mission creep where you get this grant and then you want to keep a person and then you will apply for this grant. And then 3 grants later, you're not even close to doing the same thing that you were originally planning to do. So that takes discipline on our part to kind of make sure that we're moving in that direction. We concentrate on culturally important species. We concentrate on species that are not necessarily managed by the state. State doesn't really manage non-game species at all. So and that's a problem with their funding. And that's something that can be rectified too. Their funding is just from license sales, fishing license sales, and hunting license sales. And so those constituents are pretty vocal about those dollars then only being spent on game species. So that means turtles. That means, these other non-game species, eagles otherwise aren't getting any attention. Martin, for example, down here, we're the only ones doing the work on that. And that's primarily because it's a clan animal as well. And so there's interest within our community about those and a responsibility from our community to those. We are in the process of finishing an Mgizi Aviary, eagle aviary. That again has a lot to do with the cultural reverence associated with eagles and a responsibility our community feels for eagles within our area that are injured or deceased, and we want to make sure they're taken care of properly. So those are a lot of the things that drive what we're looking at. And then just, yeah, overall environment, big issues, deer population is a real big issue we're working on, those types of things. But we have a pretty good team that keeps focus. We get off track once in a while, but yes.